In just a matter of minutes, Azim Khamisa will join us on this stage. I don't know if you've heard of him before, but if you haven't, you'll be going to find his TED Talk after he speaks today because millions of people have already been touched by his profound work in person and online. And as you're about to be, you will discover the profound work of Azim Khamisa. That work has been featured already in the New York Times, Oprah Magazine, People Magazine, Parade Magazine, Washington Post, USA Today, also NBC's Today Show, The Nightly News, CBS's Early Morning Show, and KPBS's Fresh Air. Azim is an award-winning author of the book From Murder to Forgiveness, A Father's Journey. He followed up that book in November 2007 with a book called From Forgiveness to Fulfillment, showing the continued evolution in an unfolding story that is his path, his passion, his life. A feature film is being produced about Azim as we speak. His books will be on sale in the lobby during lunch and after the conference. And so as we watch him speak and as we watch a video that we're about to see, think about questions you have for him. And later on today, as you see him, maybe at the book signing, you can ask those questions and approach him. But let's turn our attention to the screen and hear from Azim.
Good morning, greetings. Namaste. I was very inspired by listening to Baba Jain and his journey and his upbringing, especially about his guru. And I just the other day saw something about this man said, I meditate 8 minutes a day so I can conquer the world. And there was a guru sitting next to him and said, if you meditate an hour a day, you wouldn't have to do that. So, like him, I do believe peace is possible. And it's an individual journey. And Namaste, as you know, is from my tradition, is Baba Jain's tradition. And those of you who do yoga probably recognize that greeting. It's more than a greeting, it's a prayer. And what Namaste means is I honor the place in you in which the entire universe dwells. I honor the place in you that is of love, that is of truth, that is of beauty, and that is of peace. So I'm going to speak from that place in me where we are one. And I invite you also to listen to me from that place in you where we are also one. Now, the central question that we are pondering in this conference is how do we get to peace when the news that assaults us from every angle with such negative news and violence within our society and the world. Just in 2018, we've had 341 mass killings in the United States. FBI defines that as when more than 4 persons die, almost one a day. And the world is broken, and there's violence all over the world. How do we get to peace? So mine is a personal story. And as Amy introduced me, it's now a 24-year journey. I know the video talks about a 16-year journey. We started very dark with murder. And my trilogy is from murder to forgiveness, forgiveness to fulfillment, and fulfillment to peace, which was my last book. So I want to share with you that the portal that brought me to peace was forgiveness. Tariq was my only son. I have a beautiful daughter. He was a great kid. He was a student at San Diego State University, a wise soul in a young body, a great writer, a talented photographer, and blessed with a great sense of humor. His favorite hero was Gandhi, a man of peace. And he worked Fridays and Saturdays as a pizza delivery man. When I called January 1995, he was lured to a bogus address by a youth gang. It was his turn, so he jumped in his Volkswagen. They gave the right address of the apartment building, but the wrong address, but the wrong apartment number. So he'd go to the apartment building, and he knocked on many doors, trying to find out who'd ordered the pizzas. Of course, nobody had. So he came back to his car, climbed in the driver's side seat, put the pizzas in the trunk of his car, and as he was about to leave the scene of the crime, he was accosted by 4 youth gang members. 3 of them were 14-year-old, and the leader of the gang was an 18-year-old who handed a 9mm handgun to a 14-year-old. And as my son is trying to back his car from the driveway of the apartment building, the 18-year-old gave the order, "Bust him, Bones." Bones was his gang nickname. And he fired 1 round, which came through the driver's side window. It entered my son's body under the left shoulder blade, traveled across the upper part of his body, actually exited from his right armpit. But it was fatal. And Tariq died a couple of minutes later, drowning in his own blood over a lousy pizza. And as the coroner explained to me afterwards, he said the bullet followed a perfect path. A perfect path, I queried. I thought it was an interesting choice of words. But he was very quick to tell me, "Mr. Kamisa, I'm not trying to be insensitive. We do not see a path like this very often. And what it means in my lingo is it destroyed all the vital organs of your son's body. The sudden, senseless death of an innocent, unarmed human being. The overwhelming grief of a family. The total confusion as you try to absorb a new, hideous reality. Even though this tragedy happened 24 years ago, those early days are etched deeply on my mind, on my heart, and my soul. I don't know what's more complicated for a parent than to lose a child. And I remember one of the hardest things I've ever had to do was to call his mother. I live in San Diego, California. She lived in Seattle, Washington, so it's quite far. Think about it. How do you tell a mother that she's never, ever going to see her son again? Or give him a hug? Or hear him laugh? How do you do that? Tariq had a very special relationship with his mom. I have a very special relationship with my mom, although she passed a couple of years ago, and I still miss her desperately. I'm sure many of you can relate. It took me a while. When I finally did share with her what had happened to Tariq, she let out this loud, piercing shriek. As she hit the floor, I could actually hear on the phone her hitting the floor. And you're probably wondering, why do I share this with you? Because it is painful. And I share this with very often. In fact, I had the honor of speaking to the scholars of Legacy Charter School yesterday, and I speak to kids a lot. And I share this because sometimes you don't know how painful violence is till it crosses your path. At least I didn't. But now, I really get how painful violence is. And because I really get how painful violence is, I would never in my life be violent to another sister or another brother. And I think it's important that we all get it, young and old, because there's way too much violence in our society. The United States is the most violent first world nation in the world. The Economist, which is a reputable magazine, did a study. They took 25 first world countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, England, France, Germany, and added all the kids that die in those 25 countries as a result of gun violence, and they took the total and multiplied that by 11. That is how many we lose in the United States of America. So when it comes to violence, we are a very poor role model. I'm not knocking America. I love this country as much as you do, and there's a lot of good in this country. It's amazing what we've done in the last 240 years. We are a free market, democratic, maybe that's being challenged right now, but that's a different topic. Meritocratic country in the world, and there's a lot of opportunity here if you're willing to work hard. When it comes to violence, we are a very poor role model. And being the richest nation in the world, the only superpower in the world, we have a tremendous impact on the global culture. And we can spend hundreds of millions of dollars on wars on foreign soil. That's a big number. I mean, if I say 1 billion seconds ago, it was 1949. 1 billion minutes ago, Lord Jesus Christ was on the planet. And we can spend hundreds of billions of dollars on wars on foreign soil, yet every single day, right here in our own backyard, our children are dying in a bizarre frenzy of violence. That didn't make any sense to me. Hopefully it doesn't make any sense to you either. I was born in Kenya, was educated in England, and I actually emigrated to the United States in the middle 70s to escape the violence of Idi Amin in neighboring Uganda, thinking that my children would be safer in America. So it's very ironic that Tariq actually was violently killed on a street in a city and a country that I had picked for him. But sometimes in deep tragedy, there's a spark of clarity. Every saint has suffered the dark night of the soul. And the spark of clarity in my tragedy is that I saw that there were victims at both ends of the gun. It's a great quote from Henry David Thoreau. It doesn't matter what you look at. What matters is what you see. So what I saw in this tragedy is that there were victims at both ends of the gun. It's easy to see that my son was a victim of the 14-year-old. I think it takes a little bit more compassion and empathy to see that the 14-year-old was a victim of society, of American society. Well, that begs the question, well, who is American society? Well, it's you and me, because I don't believe that society just happenstance. All of us who are Americans, and I'm a naturalized first-generation American, are responsible for the society we've created. And children killing children is not a mark of a civil society. And I know, I'm singing to the choir here as Rotarians and responsible citizens of your city. You're all very engaged in creating a better community in your lives, in your family lives. And the question I asked is, how did we create a society where children kill children? Tony joined a gang at the age of 11 and murdered my son at the age of 14. So I felt as an American citizen that I must take my share of the responsibility for the bullet that took my son's life. Why? Because it was fired by an American child. You could take the position that he killed my one and only son, he should be hung from the highest pole. How does that improve society? I worked as an international investment banker, traveled the world when my son was alive, and really had no clue that there were such things as youth gangs. And since Tariq was killed by a 14-year-old, I started to look at the challenges of youth violence. It's huge. Doesn't matter what city, urban or suburban you go to, youth violence is one of the biggest malaise in our society. And I didn't feel that as a country we were doing enough to make sure that our children don't end up in lives of gangs and crimes and drugs and alcohol and weapons. And you heard me say this on the video, that who's the enemy here? Is it the 14-year-old who killed my son, or the societal forces that force many young men, especially young men of color, to fall through the crack and then choose lives of gangs, of drugs, of alcohol and weapons? That's the real culprit. So 9 months after Tariq died, and to help my family and me deal with this in a positive way and to honor my son, and knowing these horrific statistics, I felt I had to do something about it. So I founded the Tariq Khamisa Foundation, which is named after my son. And our initial mission was to stop kids from killing kids, and we essentially had 3 mandates. Our first and foremost mandate was to save lives of children. Important to do. In Newtown, Connecticut, 5, 6, 7-year-old were gunned down in machine gun fire. They had a lot of living to do. Our second mandate was to empower the right choices so our children don't fall through the crack and choose lives of crime and violence. And our third mandate was to teach the principles of nonviolence, of empathy, of compassion, of forgiveness, and of peacemaking and peace building. And I started with a very simple premise, that violence is a learned behavior. No child was born violent. Tony, who took Tariq's life, wasn't born violent. Well, if you accept that violence is a learned behavior, is an axiom, then it follows that nonviolence can also be a learned behavior. But think about it. Where do our kids learn nonviolence? Movies, television, video games. This might surprise you. By the time our children get to grade 1. They're 6 years old. They've seen over 100,000 images of violence. Soon after I started the foundation, I asked the district attorney to introduce me to Tony's grandfather, Ples Felix, and you met him on the video. A good man, had a nice home for his grandson. Has a master's degree in urban development, served our country as a Green Beret during the Vietnam War, and loved his grandson and had no clue that his grandson was gang involved. And when I met him for the first time, I told him that I've come here not in the spirit of anger and resentment and revenge because your grandson killed my son. Rather, I've come here in the spirit of compassion and forgiveness because what I really see here is we both lost a son. My son died, and you lost your grandson, although his grandson lived with his grandfather and calls him daddy. So he's like a son to him. And you lost your grandson to the adult criminal justice system. And I've started this foundation with a very lofty mission statement of stopping kids from killing kids. And I can't do this by myself. This is a pretty big job. So the real reason I reached out to you in compassion and forgiveness is to ask for your help. Will you help me? And the first things out of his mouth were, Azim, thank you for reaching out to me. Ever since I found out that my grandson was responsible for the death of your son, I went into the prayer closet. Ples is an African American. Well, I was kidding about that. I said, Ples, I was born in Africa, you were not. I'm the African American in this group, not you. I'm proud of that, you know. He's Christian. I am Muslim. His grandson killed my son, and we are brothers. And the first thing out of his mouth was, I went into the prayer closet praying that someday I get to meet you. So thank you for reaching out to me, because I wanted to express my condolences to you and your family for your loss. And of course, I will help you. He's as passionate about the Tariq Kamisa Foundation, which is now in its 24th year, as I am. And when we are in schools, which we are very often in schools, I've given over 1,000 presentations worldwide to kids, as I did at the Legacy Charter School yesterday. And when we are together, we are introduced. This man's grandson killed this man's son, and here they are together in the spirit of compassion and forgiveness. You know, kids have never seen this. A lot of adults haven't seen this. We specialize in our programs from 5th grade to 9th grade. So kids are about 11 to 15 years old. And when they meet us and they see this image, it's the first time they've actually seen that violence does not have to beget more violence. Over the years, I've given a live presentation to over 1 million kids. I have over 150,000 letters that I've received from these kids. And what gives me hope is that not only are these principles of nonviolence teachable, our kids are hungry for them. And yesterday at Legacy School, I talked about that. I see conflict as an opportunity to create a brother, a sister, love, and unity. We're talking about conflict resolutions. I told the kids that, and I spoke to the high school kids yesterday, that I wish I could tell you you're not going to have any conflict in your life. Obviously, that's not very practical. You've already had a lot of conflict, and as you go to university and the workforce, you're going to have more conflict. What are you going to do? Are you going to create more conflict from conflict, or are you going to look at an opportunity and using these principles of empathy and compassion and forgiveness, create a brother or a sister or love or unity? So the Tariq Khamisa Foundation now has created a safe school model. We've evolved a lot over the 24 years. So our first program is a live assembly. And after I share my testimony and the grandfather shares his testimony, we actually then process, because a lot of our work is in inner city schools. Did you notice when I asked in the video how many of you have lost family members as a result of gun violence? Did you notice how many hands went up? Yeah? First time I asked this question, 2/3 of the hands went up. 2/3. Middle school kids. I remember I cried all the way home. I'm thinking, how can these young people deal with so much grief and despair and hopelessness? So we processed that. We processed through a PowerPoint how you deal with negative emotions. And by practicing these principles, how do you repair relationships? How do you fix situations? How do you heal through the process of forgiveness? After the assembly, we have a robust program on restorative practices, a 10-week program start in classroom where we actually teach empathy, we teach compassion, we teach forgiveness, we teach conflict resolution. We teach about how do you take conflict and resolve it without violence. We teach that if you're going to be a leader, a nonviolent leader that practices peacemaking, you always have to make good and nonviolent choices, even when you are violated like I was. So if you are being bullied, you need to respond to the bully with empathy, because bullies need help too. They weren't born that way. So this 10-week program, we have 3 different levels of it. Our first level is for 5th and 6th graders. Our second level is for 7th and 8th graders. And our third is for 9th grade. And we specialize in this area because Tony joined a gang in 6th grade and killed my son in 8th grade. Our third program is we create a peace club on campus. And the Peace Club essentially is a leadership program. We have about 60 different titles. Well, what does it take to be a leader? What does it take to get engaged in community and become peacemakers and peace builders? Because we're not going to wake up one day and find that the world is at peace. We all have to proactively work at it. And our third program is mentoring. So what we find that in San Diego County, in a middle school, you're going to have about 1,000 to 1,200 kids. And someplace between 8 and 12% of those kids are challenging kids or on a slippery slope and potential to get involved with gangs and crimes and drugs and alcohol and weapons. So those 8 to 12%, we hook them up with our mentors. And our mentors work with these kids not only in the school, but also in their communities and in their homes. I remember this story about a 7th grader. His name is Alejandro, Hispanic. We have a lot of Hispanic people that live in San Diego. Goes by Alex. And you could see that this kid was one of those challenging kids. He had that walk and the signs and the colors, and you could see he was a wannabe gang member. And on the class on empathy, we always have a theme. The theme on empathy is, you don't know me till you walk a mile in my shoes, and I don't know you till I walk a mile in your shoes, because you can't have empathy for somebody you don't know. I know everything there is to know about Tony. And sometimes I wonder, if you look at his life, he was born to a 14-year-old. His favorite uncle was murdered when he was 8 years old. He was seduced by his uncle's girlfriend. He was an angry kid. His father was not in his life. And I wonder sometimes that if I had shared the same life journey as Tony had, would I have made the same choice he did? So Alex was very moved with this lesson on empathy, because our homework is go walk a mile in somebody's shoes you don't know. So our next lesson, because the precursor for forgiveness is compassion, the precursor for compassion is empathy, the precursor for empathy is to get to know somebody, to know their life history. So the next lesson on compassion, the teacher asked, who wants to share their homework on empathy? And Alex's hand shot up, because he really wanted to share. And the teacher thought, this kid is the most disruptive kid in my class. He's going to ruin my class. So she tried to ignore Alex, Look at some of these other kids. But she couldn't ignore him. So finally she said, Alex, what is it that you want to share about your homework? He didn't ruin the class. He actually made the class. Here's what he said. He said, I was walking in the hood last weekend, and this kid gave me a dirty, angry look. And the kid giving me a dirty, angry look is African American. Alex is a lot bigger than this kid giving him a dirty, angry look. And he said, because you taught me that you don't know me till I walk a mile in your shoes. I walked up to this kid and said, why are you giving me a dirty, angry look? And the kid says, I'm not giving you a dirty, angry look. I'm angry because my brother was shot and killed right in this spot last night. So what did you do, Alex? I reached out to him. I put my hand on his shoulder and I said to him, you know what? I know exactly how you feel, because my favorite uncle was also shot and killed in the same spot 6 months ago. Tell me you can't teach this stuff. Alex walks the hood every weekend, not just last weekend. What does he do when he gets an angry, dirty look? He reaches out. That's empathy. One of our mentors, her name is Rocio. She was beaten badly on her way from school to home, and she was in 7th grade. She only lives 4 blocks away. And she was bald, and fortunately there was an adult around there that saved her. She got home, very angry. 2 days later, the Tariq Foundation brought our Peacemaker Assembly to her school, and she met the grandfather and me, and she was so moved that I was able to forgive Tony and reach out to his grandfather. Well, that inspired her to forgive the kids that had mauled her. She went through high school. She went to Berkeley, got a degree in social work, and is now one of our top facilitators. She's back working at the Tariq Kamisa Foundation. So this stuff is teachable. I just spoke at San Diego State University. This kid came up to me and said, "Mr. Kamisa, you changed my life." I said, "Tell me more." He said, "When I was in 7th grade, you came and talked to my school, and I know you are a banker, and I decided to follow you and make you my role model and not follow my elder brother, my father, or my grandfather, who were all gang involved." 5 years after the tragedy, and for me, I knew I had to complete my forgiveness journey, I went to meet Tony. He was 19 years old. And complicated to know, to do that, it took a couple thousand hours of meditation. I meditate 2 hours a day. It was very difficult to come eyeball to eyeball with a person who actually pulled the trigger on you. And we are all mortals. But something amazing happened in that meeting, because there were some holes in the story that only he could complete. But at one point in that hour-and-a-half meeting, we locked eyeballs. I'm looking in his eyes, he's looking in my eyes, and we held that for a very long time. I'm looking in his eyes trying to find a murderer. And I wasn't able to. I was able to climb through his eyes and touch his humanity, that I got the spark in him was no different than the spark in me or any one of you. I wasn't expecting that. He was well-mannered. He was remorseful. He was articulate. And he did not display any of the typical attitudes of a 19-year-old in our society. I wasn't expecting that. So at that point, I told him, "Tony, you know that I've forgiven you because I've been working with your grandfather for a good 4 years, since I started the foundation 9 months after Tariq died. I also want you to know that when you come out of prison, you have a job waiting at the Tariq Kamisa Foundation, and you can come work with your grandfather and me." And then I left after a couple of hours, and I still remember distinctly that the stride I walked out of the prison was a lot more bouncier than the one I'd walked in with. Forgiveness can be very freeing. It's like a big albatross weight that was lifted off my shoulder. And the preeminent thought in my mind was, why did I wait 5 years? The good news is, last November 28th, I was at Tony's parole hearing, and he won parole. I've been trying to get him out for 12 years. Think about the power of him on stage. When he tells the students, when I was 11, I joined a gang. When I was 14, I murdered Mr. Kamisa's son. I spent the last umpteen years in prison. I wish I could turn the clock back. Do you think the kids will listen to that voice? Yeah. Because his intonations will be of a person that actually pulled the trigger. I know we've saved him. Think about how many he will save when he joins the foundation. And that, my sisters and brothers, I think, demonstrates the power of forgiveness. And Tony he's halfway through his degree in social work. He actually wrote the foreword to my last book, From Fulfillment to Peace. He's a good writer, and I can't wait for him to finish his parole. They've still got a couple of hoops to go through and become part of the foundation. So what's the takeaway here? So my last book, Fulfillment to Peace, was based on a quote that I wrote after the 9/11 tragedy. Of course, it's very heavy on all of our hearts, a little heavier on my heart because this atrocity was perpetrated by people of my faith. I'm a practicing Muslim. And I went into this very dark, introspective area for a good 8 or 9 months, thinking, how could this happen? Because the same faith helped me to get to forgiveness. It's not the faith. It's politics, it's petrodollars, it's geopolitics, it's power, it's ammunition, it's gun. It's all a different conversation. And after 8 months, I'm an avid writer. I got this quote, which I put in my journal. And I want to end my address to you with this quote. Sustained goodwill creates friendship. Now, that ought to be obvious. You don't make friends by bombing them. You make friends by extending goodwill. So sustained goodwill creates friendship. Sustained friendship creates trust. And Baba Jain talked about trust. Sustained trust creates empathy. Sustained empathy creates compassion. Sustained compassion creates peace. So I call it my peace formula. Goodwill, friendship, trust, empathy, compassion, peace. But people ask me, how do you extend goodwill to the person who murdered your child? I tell them you do that through forgiveness. As it's evident it worked for me, it worked for my family. What I believe is a miracle, it worked for him, it worked for his family. It can work for you and your families, and Israel and Palestine, and North and South Korea, and Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria. It can work for the United States of America. So let me leave you with this, my sisters and brothers. Peace is possible. How do I know that? Because I am at peace. Thank you very much, and namaste.